Thank you. So welcome to the community briefing for the field improvements at Murphy Playground. I'm Nellie Ward, and hey, Preston, can you go to the first slide, please? Thanks. I'm Nellie Ward, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks Department overseeing the project, and I will be your point of contact through the design and construction process. And I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time and your schedule and giving the little bit of free time that you have to us. And at this time, I'd like to welcome any elected officials and staff that might be on the call and ask you to raise your hand if you would like to say something at this time. Do we have any hands?
We do, but they're under the same name as you. So
go ahead and answer it.
There we go.
Sorry, I don't know. I clicked the link and it says your name. I'll change that. Hi, I'm Sam Montaño. I'm the state rep for this district, just listening in to see what's going on in the process for the parks redevelopment.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here. All right, next slide, please. So we have a few little items to go over before we get into the actual project. This meeting does get recorded and that gets posted on the website in about a week. And so you can share this meeting with any other person that you know that may have missed the meeting or neighbor. But we do ask that during the meeting, the video and microphone are off, but we are going to ask you to turn your videos on if you feel comfortable, and we'll have a discussion and listening session after we get through the presentation. Next slide, please. Great. So we hope everyone will feel comfortable sharing their questions and comments, either verbally or in the chat. And if you don't feel comfortable in the meeting, you can always email me directly. And I believe Shauna can put my email in the chat for you all. Next slide, please. So on Zoom, you can use the raise your hand button if you would like to ask a question at the end. And if you're calling in, you need to press *9 to raise your hand, and then we can call on you. Next slide, please. Great. So we will go through, introduce the team, and then talk generally about the project. Basically, we're doing a community briefing, so we're going to go through site analysis and then the design concept, and then we will have some time for questions and closing remarks. Next slide. So once again, I'm Nellie Ward, the project manager, and our design team here is CBA Landscape Architects. We have DJ Chagnon and Preston Holman with us, and also Shauna Dixon, who is moderating tonight from Boston Parks. Next slide, please. Getting into the project overview. One more slide. Awesome. So this project came about largely because of you all who got a petition together and helped shine a light on the need to update this space, which is a major community asset. And after BPRD secured funding for the project, it kicked off in August 2023. And in the fall, the design team, BPRD, went to Margarita Muniz Academy, and we had an engagement event with the high school students. And we talked with the school, with Boston Public Schools, about how they use the field and how it could be more useful to them and what the needs are for the school. And I've also reached out individually to all of the permit holders that have permits here and gotten some feedback from those folks. So now we've sort of like taken all that feedback that we could and kind of started to develop design concepts, and we're presenting it to you to hear get your feedback and to use that feedback to finalize the design and move that design into construction documents, which is happening in these next couple of months. And then hopefully in the spring, we open up for bidding and potentially going into construction in the summer. And if all goes well, the hardscape will at least open in the winter I can talk more about the construction schedule for the fields, which will depend on when seating gets established and all of that. But for the fields, we're looking at getting you all back out on there late summer, early fall next year, if everything goes according to schedule. Next slide, please. So for Boston Parks, there are all sorts of components that go into the parks design. Aside from community input, which is what we're doing here today, but we also have safety guidelines and regulations that we have to follow. And then we also have, aside from the WU administration goals, we also have Parks and Rec goals. Next slide. So just citywide goals are about increasing walkability, addressing equity, trying to integrate green stormwater infrastructure systems, public health, obviously, with public, sports is really important, and then opportunities for community building in our public spaces. Next slide. Accessibility is a major goal of both the WU administration and also the Parks Department. Obviously, we all work together, but increasing access for folks in wheelchairs and with other kinds of disabilities, balancing different types of uses in one space. So not just like prioritizing one group over another, but kind of mixing everybody together and everybody's needs together and trying to address them in a cohesive way. Of course, community engagement and creating more resilient landscapes as the climate and world begins to change, and promoting connections within the community. Next slide. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the design team and they'll talk through site analysis and design concepts. And then again, we'll open it up for a listening discussion at the end. Thanks. Preston, take it away, or DJ.
So this first slide, I know we all know where Murphy Playground is, but this gives you a sense of the other green spaces and sports complexes, fields in the general area. So you'll see in quarter-mile walking distance, there's basketball, tennis, street hockey, and it's not until you get to a half-mile distance you start to see, baseball, softball, soccer. There's some off the map at Daisy's Field. So there is a need for in this area to maintain the spaces or the use for the field out there. Next slide zooms in and we look at some of the different say elements surrounding the playground, the major one being the existing school, which uses Murphy Field during for gym, and their students also go out there and enjoy lunch. And this is on top of all the permit holders' uses. The site, as most of you know, it's between Carolina Ave and Child Street, flanked on the side by Verona Street. Green spaces within the general vicinity. You have the South Street Mall with the tennis courts. But beyond that, I mean, this is really kind of an important space to the neighborhood. And then this slide kind of divides the project up into the two areas. So the yellow shows the full scope of the site, and then the purple dashes are showing the specific area related to the ball field, the path moving around the field itself. Then this pink also shows that there's also a little playground area, and that will be discussed a little further as how that area will be addressed. Another big element, the existing bleachers along the edge of the ball field, and then there is this kind of dining patio with a direct connection to the school that the students also use during lunch.
Yeah, so I get to take over from here. DJ Shagnon, I'm a principal in charge at CBA. So yeah, looking at the sports fields particularly, which obviously are the heart and soul of this space and really important. We've got a lot of permit holders, a lot of stakes. The biggest uses being Little League and youth baseball between Regan Summer Baseball, Muddy River, and EHS sometimes practices here, English High. And then also softball. We've got Hub Sports has an adult softball league, in addition to, I think, English does some softball practice here. Soccer between the Soccer Shots program and also JP Youth Soccer are big users of the field particularly over the summertime. And the spring for soccer. And then Boston Ultimate Disc Alliance, the Ultimate Frisbee folks, for ages, I think it was 8 to 18, are out there, most Sundays throughout the spring and summer into October. There's a lot of really heavy use on this field. It's used 6 to 8 p.m. most weekdays, Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, between all the various permit holders, as everybody knows, the field is constantly in use. It is sized really, really well for a Little League diamond. It's a little tight, and softball with a 60-foot base path. It's a little tight for adult use baseball, but when you get up into the older teens, it's still kind of, it's borderline, but it's usable for the big league, Little League play and so forth. So around the perimeter, we've got sports lights at the 4 yellow dots that show on the field, which are not in great condition. They're not in great shape. They're not giving good light to the field. We've got 18-foot high fences with, as anyone who knows the site knows, these sort of jogs in and out along the outer perimeter of everything, as well as ball netting on top of them on Child Street and Verona Street sides. And then there's 5-foot fencing along the bleachers. There's a low fence around the playground. Mostly that's it. The ball field is a little closer than would be ideal to the existing backstop and so forth. The fields are heavily used. They're in okay shape, but we definitely want to prioritize bringing them up and giving them a good thorough renovation. And we'll go into that more in the design process. Also, if anyone who has experience with playing on the field during the Q&A, if you have particular problem areas you want to call to our attention to make sure that get addressed, definitely let us know on those. Can you do the next slide, Preston? So just a few images of the existing views. We've got a view out from the bleachers, out across the field. View back across the infield towards the Child Street backstop. The players' benches, which are not in terrific shape, but they're not in terrible shape. The bleachers, we'll go more into that, but they are in terrible shape. And then the sports lights, as I said, are aging. They're very old technology, and they're not doing that hot. So next slide. Yeah, the existing concrete bleachers, I think, as anyone who knows the site would agree, are in some pretty significant disrepair. And there are some clear accessibility issues with them, which we'll get into in a moment also. But fortunately, most of it seems to be surface damage. So we think we can make a little budget go a long way in terms of addressing the bleachers to refresh them, stabilize them, basically preventive maintenance and deferred maintenance without having to do a wholesale redo, so that we can really focus on the important stuff, getting the field up to snuff. Next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, accessibility and ADA compliance, which Nellie brought up, that one of the priorities Boston Parks has is accessibility. And right now, the perimeter pathway around is almost all not accessible for various reasons that we'll get into in some images. The stairway up from the corner of Verona Street doesn't meet current regulations in a few ways. The bleachers don't have any accessible stairs or anything to them. The playground, because of its surfacing, not accessible. Most of the park entrances aren't. So there's some work needed to bring the site into ADA compliance, even if, you know, that relies on getting there from the sidewalks. Another interesting feature is that there is an accessible way to the lunch terrace, the plaza at the top of the bleachers from the school, but it requires going very much the long way around. Sort of under that picture at the upper left, there's a connection that gets you to the front doors of the school, but you have to have gotten to those and out and around, and it meets accessibility barely, but not well. And then the loading dock area at the bottom left has some accessibility challenges from the sidewalk. Next slide. So some of those images, you know, the access to the fields at various corners tends to be just hit or miss in terms of accessibility. There's no circulation around at all that's reliable. The Carolina Street gates, you know, looking up the stairs from Verona and Child Street, the brick is in pretty poor shape. There aren't proper handrails and a few other things. The slope up from Child Street at what's probably the primary access most people would use if they're coming for the ball field is steeper than it ought to be. There's sort of, it's a tight spot and you feel like you're coming into the back of everything. And then around the path, you know, the path is heaved by tree roots, furniture blocking sections of it. The edges of the tree wells have been heaved up and there are trip hazards and so forth. There are steps at the entrance to the bleachers, so you can't even pull a wheelchair. If someone's in a wheelchair and wants to spectate the game, they can't easily get to the bleacher seating to sit with anyone else. So we want to address all of these circulation and accessibility issues, but to do so in a way that preserves the existing trees as much as possible and so on. Next slide. So coming to those existing trees, we've had an arborist out to look at the site and they're preparing the more formal report. So this is sort of a preview. Most of the trees are in fairly good shape to mediocre shape, but can be improved with pruning and some maintenance. So we're going to do that. There are 3 larger yellowwood trees that they recommend come out. There's also a small mulberry, which is smaller than the city's tree regulations actually cover, but given that we were talking about tree removals, it was worth bringing up. So those are in poor enough condition that they are being considered for removal, and we'll have an update on that as time goes on, I think. Nellie, do you want to clarify at all the process in terms of the trees?
Nope, I think you did a
Okay.
great job. Yeah,
Didn't
thanks.
want to misstate it, but
Thank you.
yeah, and as mentioned, there's plenty of heaving by the tree roots. And then in a number of places, there are pretty significant growth of invasive vines on the fences that we want to remove as part of renovating the fences anyway, because they're compromising it, and then put a mow strip under the fence in order to prevent them from coming back. So a concrete strip below the fence edge. The other benefit of this is that when we talk to folks from the Muniz Academy, they stress that the students like to come out and filter down along those pathways for at lunchtime or so forth to circulate and sit with friends. And especially because of the vines, there are, security concerns with them getting out around the far end. So we're hoping that opening up those sight lines can make more of the space usable to the students for those periphery activities, I guess. It's a good way to put it. The major species on site, red maples, yellow woods, green ash, and so forth, are the three main ones that are around those perimeter. Next, sorry. Yeah, just some images. The fencing along Child Street, Carolina, Verona. The trees are growing into the fence, especially the ball netting at the top, pretty much all along. And so we need to do some pruning for the sake of both the trees and the fencing. And then we're having the arborist, look at and give us really strong recommendations about trees with the pruning scars or the larger trunk scars and wounds and so forth. And like I said, right now, the preliminary assessment is that there are 3 that are under consideration for possible removal. And we'll see where the decision finally comes down. Next slide. So Preston mentioned the playground area, which we are looking at this point as a potential ad alternate, which is to say, it's if the budget allows, if we can cover all of the things that are really important, the fields, the lighting, what we need to for accessibility, we would love to be able to also make some improvements to the playground. It is about 22 years old at this point. So it's getting on in years, but it has good bones. There's a lot of the play structure that's actually pretty salvageable. It's just there are a number of components that are out of compliance with the current codes. And in addition, the wood chip safety surface isn't accessible. It requires a lot of maintenance, isn't what Parks tends to work towards. So we have a plan for how we would address the play structure if budget allows. I see some comments coming through in chat that we can generally address at the end, but about trees and shade and lighting. And we will definitely get into all that, but the goal is to preserve as much of the tree canopy as is safe to maintain. We'll only take something down if it's presenting a potential hazard. Okay, next slide. There we go. So on to those proposed improvements. We'll take a little bit of this and then I'll pass it back to Preston for some of the details. In terms of the sports fields, we want to rebuild the infield a little bit further out, get it a better distance from the backstop, and straighten out the backstop's lines so that the spectator seating is out of the way. Set up new light locations, 6 of them instead of just 4, that are brand new LED sports light poles, and we'll get to the technical bits of that in a bit. And then upgrade the field wholesale to improve the conditions and also to address any particular problem areas, but we want to protect and improve the field areas that are in good to fair shape already, and anywhere that is having particular problems, we also want to do targeted additional improvements. But the plan is to aerate and slit seed, overseed the entire field to get it refreshed, renewed, give it a really good solid foundation to work on. And then anywhere that seems to need soil amendments or additional attention or leveling, we will tackle. In addition to those, we're creating a perimeter path to connect from Carolina down along the bleachers and behind the new backstop, so that there's an entrance that feels a little separate from the loading dock, and you don't feel like you're coming into a utility area, you feel like you're arriving at the ball field. And then over the two sides of the pathway that are outside the fence along Child and Verona, we'll use a flexible pervious pavement instead of asphalt or something for the paths. We'll go into more on that in a bit, as well as for the path where it's inside the fence because of space restrictions along Carolina. which also has the benefit of being a slight texture difference. So it serves a little bit like a warning strip for any ball players, because that's one of our short lines. We're planning to refurbish the fencing on all three sides and replace the ball netting. The Little League infield, I say Little League because it's really Little League and, sort of big league, Little League, but the field isn't big enough to fully host adult baseball, but it's great for softball and sort of up to high school and junior high. There's a question that came through the chat. Will the ball netting be replaced on all three sides? I think the intent is to get ball netting up on all three sides. Yes. We're still finalizing the exact scope, but that's the goal and the intent. So yeah, the infield size is a little smaller than a 90-foot base path would want, but 90-foot base paths will fit on it. If we get any bigger than that, it has two problems, both encouraging, full adult play, who there's just not the outfield depth for that. And it's not what any of the permit holders are using. And then there are, in addition, it's, more than big enough for Little League, softball, and even sort of Pony League level uses. And then in terms of the main fields, right, people are commenting in the chat that the ball field's large enough for under 16 use. True adult leagues do not or are not permitted currently to play at Murphy. It does apparently happen at times, but that's sort of also a permitting question. There's room to fit a 12 and under soccer field, as well as a 6 and under soccer field onto the remaining in the outfield. The ultimate frisbee fields, technically the space fits a 15 and under field for ultimate, but again, I mean, it'll continue to be usable as it has been usable for all of the leagues and permit holders that are currently using it. So they're really who we're trying to revitalize the field for. In addition, around the perimeter, we're adding a mix of seating types, some benches, some sort of table and chair seating. Benches more in areas where people are likely to want to spectate from, tables and chairs sort of around the outside edges where the kids, need seating for their lunches and so forth. I think we've covered everything that was on this one. Oh, and that alternate of revitalizing the playground in the upper left. Next slide.
I just want to jump in and say that this site, we didn't talk about it yet, but is also just really used by Margarita Muniz Academy for recess and for PE and for lunches. And we didn't talk about it in the permit holder area, but that's like an important consideration for us too, as this is a Boston Public Schools property that Boston Parks operates and maintains.
Yes.
Thanks.
And to that note, also the playground, even though it seems like with a high school there and primarily a sports field, the playground gets neighborhood use for sure by neighborhood residents. And there are also a few daycares and other preschools in the area that we understand use the playground. So if you can flip to the next slide. The main approach to the treatment of the grass fields is we want to prioritize protecting the portions that are working well, which is to say we're going to keep construction traffic off them other than for the field improvements themselves. We want to definitely aerate and seed slice, overseed the entirety of the field to get that up to proper grass cover and germination. We will be leveling out. There's a couple of spots where the grading is a little bit wonky, but not terribly so. If there's anywhere that seems to be having particular drainage issues, other than the infield, which I'll get to in a moment, we want to do some soil amendment there. So far, we have not found anywhere that's a real drainage problem area. But again, this is why we're having a community listening session, is we want to hear from you all too about anything we haven't seen because we weren't out there in the right season yet or something. And then the infield itself, we're planning to rebuild with a good natural infield clay mix, relocated a little bit further out from the backstop, and end up creating one that'll have a portable pitching mound so that it can move to the different lengths for the different uses, new team benches, rebuilt or refurbished backstop. Well, I guess it's a new backstop because we're relocating it. We went back and forth early in the design about exactly what we're up to. So that's the general impression. So we will go through all the questions at the end. I do see a lot coming in, and we will definitely circle back to all of them. Next slide. Yeah, and in terms of the sports field lighting, we're working with a basis of design manufacturer to get really good quality of light on the fields and just on the fields. That's one of the benefits to the new LED lighting packages. But we gave them directives of what light levels the infield and the outfield should meet in terms of foot candles to meet typical regulation play standards. So you have a 50-foot candle average in the infield, 30-foot candle average in the outfield, which is also enough for soccer field use. And it ends up working out pretty well with 6 new light pole locations. And if you flip to the next slide, Preston, I know there was some concern about the glare off the existing lights and how the trees are really all that serves to mitigate that. That's because those existing lights are old. The technology has come a long way, and this is a great sort of comparison slide of different products from the same manufacturer over the years, going from the old, very glary lights. They're all aimed at the field, all same distance away, and the modern lights are still putting plenty of light on the field with almost no uplight, almost no glare, and it really gets the field lit and not much else. You can sort of see that in the images to the right that aren't photoshopped to the best of my knowledge. They're not our images originally, but the light cutoff is incredibly strong at the edges of the field area, so that it really really essentially cuts way down on the light spill into neighboring properties. The field will still be well lit up, but the effect on the residents should be much, much smaller than it was. Next slide. I think this is where we'll let you take over some of the ADA details and such.
Yes, so this kind of goes a little more into detail about the improvements we're making to the bleachers to improve accessibility. In addition to what DJ had mentioned earlier about repairing the concrete out there. First we've provided a pathway with enough width and a connection to Carolina Ave and the Child Street entrance. What you see here is cutouts that will be made into the existing bleachers, and they function as wheelchair seating spaces. So I believe we're required 7, but we're putting in 8. And then, there has to be a certain amount of passing distance in front. So the player's bench is now pushed forward a little, but there isn't conflict with the field because the field was also location was adjusted with the backstop. Currently there are no stairs to the bleachers. We just kind of go up into the dining plaza, so the schools plaza. So one of the things we are looking at is cutting in 3 stairways that will allow people to actually reach the different rows of seating instead of having to climb up over the large step seats right now. And then at the dining plaza, as DJ had mentioned from the school, the only accessible route is from a door off screen that comes around here. And the school's cafeteria is located right about here. So I believe there's a step down at the door, a landing, and another step. We are going to eliminate that and instead put a ramp in. So you'll walk out flush, and then someone on a wheelchair can easily access the plaza. And then there is an accessible route to the lower area that involves using Carolina Ave, but as we were not able to make the connection with the funds available down to the lower portion of the field. But this again will improve the current condition. It'll also allow individuals in wheelchairs to actually sit at the back of the plaza. I mean, the back of this is a retaining wall going above, or it's actually freestanding above the bleachers. So someone in a wheelchair could sit right behind it and they'll have a great view of the field itself. This is a section showing what the bleacher stairs will look like. There's a center handrail, so people moving on either side can easily access the rows. Okay.
I just wanted to jump in real quick,
Yeah.
actually, on that slide, and say that the priority for the budgetary expenditure is the fields and the lights and all of those improvements. But however, there are also legal requirements that get kicked in when we do site improvements in parks. So not only is it like the ethically appropriate thing to do to, increase accessibility, but we also recognize that there are legal requirements to make spaces more inclusive for all of people in our city. And so we're also in the process of getting a variance with the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board to not completely adhere by every piece of the design elements that would need to be changed to make this the bleachers accessible, because the priority is the fields. So I just want to mention that that we're kind of in the process right now of working with the board to define the scope of this area in conjunction to preserving the budget that we have for the fields. So these like stairs that we're seeing, like those may or may not be part of this design at all. But if we make any changes, there's certain things that we have to consider to legally meet the code that is required. So I just wanted to throw that out there while we were discussing. Thank you, Preston.
No, thank you. So this next slide looks into the material that we would put on the path outside of the fencing, and it's a flexible pavement. And so as you had seen from the existing condition photos earlier, the tree roots have heaved a lot of the pavement. So this material is designed to work with existing trees and provide a smooth, accessible surface while also minimizing impact to the tree roots themselves during installation. So you can see over here that this is a photo of showing that the material itself is permeable, allowing water to go down to the roots of the trees. And then, the installation of itself involves, some base material that will work around the roots and, again, lessen the impact to those existing trees to help preserve them, because that really is something that is important. This looks at some of the site furniture we're proposing. A larger table. Actually, the table we're proposing would not have a seat in one location to allow a wheelchair to also sit at this table, so it's inclusive. So we have the larger tables. We also have some areas with smaller tables. And then, again, waste receptacles, benches in some locations, the benches will have backs. In other location, the benches will be backless, which allows people to sit, facing either direction depending on what they're doing, whether they're watching sports or whether they're more talking to their friends. So it's just to add flexibility to the use of the spaces. And then this last slide is depending on what the bid comes back from the contractor. This would be an adult, this being the playground improvements. And what we see here in black and white is the existing structure that was installed many years ago. And then over here on the right shows the improvements we are proposing, or the renovations to the structure. The existing components being this yellow-orange color and the black showing the proposed components. So we're adding new slides, monkey bars, spinners, and again, this is all to bring the structure into regulation to meet current regulations, as well as just generally improve it. This next slide shows it's basically a comparison between existing structure and the proposed. So maybe the details are fairly subtle, but in the slides you can see how we're adding different slides. There's a climbing component here that isn't over there. Again, you can kind of see we're replacing this stepping component with a ladder. We're adding a spinner. So it's just general improvements to the play equipment.
Yeah. Can you roll back to that one for a half?
Yeah.
second?
Oops.
Just as the office's certified playground safety inspector, it's things like on that existing double slide that's in the foreground, it goes right off of the deck, and the current code requires sort of a longer entry area that steps in, but then there's a little less space for the slides, so we end up with a recommendation to switch to a curvy slide instead, for instance. Also, it just refreshes the playground, makes it a little bit new for the kids that have played with it for ages and so on. It's other things like the overhead wheel spinner in the bottom right is too close to the existing deck for current safety codes, so we replace it with one that's further out and so forth. But again, that's all it would be great to do. And we'll look to see where it gets in terms of budget. Yeah, that was all I had to say on the playground stuff. So I think we're on to the opening it up for questions, right, Nellie?
Yeah, thank you so much, DJ and Preston. And the way that we'll go through comments is we'll go through raised hands first, and then we will switch over to questions in the chat. Do we have any questions or feedback? And also just thank you so much for staying on and being here tonight.
Okay.
Shauna?
Yeah, the first person says new user, so I'm gonna unmute you now.
How you doing? My real name is Ben Weber. I'm the city councilor for District 6. I couldn't figure out how to change my name. Thanks for this presentation. I'm very familiar with the facility. My kids went to the Mission Hill School, so I did pickups for about 10 years here. My son played ultimate frisbee at the field, Buddha, and I've coached soccer practice with JP Soccer for my daughter's team there. And I think this, this field is the center of the community, and it's great that it's going to be addressed and made into a better facility for not just the kids using it, but it looks like you've thought about neighbors and the impact on them. I guess I would, I haven't coached there in a couple of years, so I know there's people on here who have more useful feedback on, areas that the field needs real work on. So I'll just defer to them. But in terms of what you have planned, it's aside from just reseeding it, can you just describe, how the problem areas are going to be addressed? And I'm really just interested, like you, to hear what people in the community have to say. So again, thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
Forward to the rest of this.
Thank you, Counselor. Yes, so to the question about addressing problem areas, I mean, some of that depends on what we find in an even more detailed look with input from the current users. I think somebody put in the chat a suggestion that was already on our minds of trying to get out there with representatives from the permit holders on site to review the playing surface and so forth. But we're aware that there are areas where it's mostly weeds rather than grass. There, the topsoil needs to come out. We need to make sure we've gotten rid of enough root mass from the weeds that they're not going to constantly come back, and we need to refresh the topsoil. There are places where it's gotten a little too compacted that needs to get aerated. The overall goal really is to turn this into a top-notch natural turf field within the capacity of Boston Parks and Rec Maintenance Department to maintain, knowing that there are measures that would be taken on it's never going to be Fenway Park, but we want it to be a really nice, good quality field for all of you. So, reseeding, removing weeds for sure, aerating like crazy where it needs it. If there are places where it's not draining well and so forth, you mix sand into the soil matrix to bring it up to a more permeable surface and so forth. And part of it really is protecting the areas that are in pretty good condition during construction so that they don't get wrecked and then we have to rebuild them from scratch. As to exactly what measures, we are still working on that, but know that the priority really is improving the field wholesale. And it's different measures in different areas to bring that up to snuff. No. Assuming that answered the counselor's question, we should move on to whoever's next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Counselor, for joining us. And I think the only thing I didn't hear you mention was leveling, but that's certainly something else that we will absolutely consider. And it's yep, part of the plan. And as we get more detailed in the designing, in the construction drawings, we will be more clear about exactly which areas. And of course, your feedback will also inform the level of intervention in different specific areas. But in addition to the overall field all being, overseeded and aerated. Yeah.
While we're talking field improvements, there was a question that came up in the chat regarding whether any irrigation is planned. And Nellie, you may be able to elaborate, but it's my understanding that Boston Parks typically does not irrigate the natural turf playing fields. Is that right?
In this case, we do not plan to irrigate the fields, as it was only something that we consider in cases where the field, there's an existing water line, an existing service line, and it's something that the field really, really needs. In this case, we think, based on our assessment of the fields that we maintain and care for, that we have interventions that will remediate the field and bring the field up to the level that we think that will be what a beautiful field for you without having to mess around with irrigation. In addition to that, it's not like logistically possible at this site.
Right.
And so those are a couple of reasons why irrigation is not on the table right now.
So we'll, look into the soil structure and everything else with the assumption that it is not an irrigated field, of course. So you design a little bit.
The field will be irrigated while the seed is being established.
Yes.
Okay, well, the next person is Christina. I'm unmuting you now.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for taking the time to present this presentation to us. I have a global question about trees, but I will leave that to my neighbor. One question I have is just like about the disruption for construction and what you expect that to be. That's pretty much globally one of my main questions.
Do you mean in terms of the time period for it, or in
Yeah, the
terms
time
of
period, the timing that you expect the construction workers to be there, what you expect the parking situation to be like, because we have one-sided parking. Also, I heard that they're opening up part of the school, so we also have buses that come by in the morning, and so buses and construction workers mean that sometimes we can't leave our homes, and so just kind of thinking about like all of that coming into play at peak times when people need to leave their homes.
We can certainly work with the selected contractor on the logistics and the staging, and on projects where CBA has worked with Boston Parks in the past, we've put pretty strong language into the specifications about public access, about staging, about logistics, about where they should be, entering the field and so forth, where they should be staging materials, which on a project like this matters a lot. So I would hope that we can keep the construction impacts timed so that they're not interfering with school pickup and drop-offs, so that there's only one obstacle going on at a time for you. Okay. And that we can keep the construction schedule as tight as possible, get them in with the heavy work and done and out, and not be a persistent thorn in the neighborhood side of how long is this construction going on. In terms of schedule, I think as Nellie said, the goal is to get it out to bid in the spring for a summer construction start, so that the outside and the majority of the infrastructure work in the middle can be done by late fall, and we can open up that outer pathway and just leave the field to sit for a growing season to really establish before it gets used. So I
two growing seasons.
What's that?
Two growing seasons.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
winter.
Yeah.
And then I think Nellie, you were talking about the permits, and I will say I live right across from Carolina, and there are very adult people who play, and so we often get baseballs thrown at our cars. We had to move our cars multiple times, and so I understand that's a permitting issue, but also part of that is like the structure of the fence is in disrepair. Yes. But I do think that there are people who play in the park who have more strength than a 13-year-old does.
Yes, and that has been brought to my attention. This field is much smaller than what we would typically like to see adults using, or adult baseball, or even the 90-foot base pads with some users can create some problems. So we're in the process of trying to make this park and field layout work for the current permit holders and the needs of the permit holders, while also balancing the needs of the neighbors, and repairing the fencing, and also thinking about permit use and what we can do behaviorally to help manage those issues. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, and it is definitely on our radar.
And I think to some extent that comes back to the question someone raised during the presentation too, about the ball netting, and we do want to get good ball netting up on all three sides, I think is really needed to keep the balls from going over. That definitely seems to be warranted based on everything we've heard and seen. The permitted uses are all young enough that either they're young enough or they're softball that it shouldn't be going over the fences, but there's definitely unpermitted use going on because there's a ball field there that's looks big enough and it's fun to hit it over the fence if you're not thinking about the cars that it's landing on.
Next question.
All right, so I have Alf, and I'm gonna mute you now.
All right, good. Thank you. Hey, I'm Alf Gracum, and I am with Jamaica Plain Youth Soccer. I was president for 4 years, and I'm still on the board. Also, I've coached many years with the Regan League, so I've definitely kind of seen the range of youth sports that get played on the field. And so we were some of the kind of original folks, advocating for a project here. So just want to say thank you for getting this off the ground and getting the budget put in place for the work. So some of my thoughts will probably echo what Councilor Weber just said. And I think just from what you all shared, I mean, I think this is great and definitely headed in the right direction. I love the new lights. I also should mention I live on Carolina Avenue as well, not abutting the space, but just a block or two down the street. So I guess my questions are really just focused primarily around the field space and the condition of the field. And I know it's difficult here in Boston, just given climate, to have, well-maintained natural grass fields. I don't think anybody's under the illusion that this is going to look like Fenway Park when it's all said and done. And I know the city's not putting in new turf fields, and there's probably going to be resistance to that regardless. So I guess my perspective is just whatever we can do to make this field safe and playable for kids. And right now, there's just a mix of, the soil's terrible. I know there's like gravel in a lot of spots. It's not just a matter of, weeds instead of grass. There's a lot of bare spots. It does get used, I know, a lot by dog owners, and anything the city can do or in the design that can signal that this is a sports playing surface and not a dog park would be, I think, a big win. Ongoing maintenance, I know, is not going to be part of this initial budget for the plan, but I'll just say for anyone here who's with the city, just like some attention given to this field after this work is done, because these investments can over time, really lose their value if there's just not some maintenance that happens along the way. So I'm not an expert on, natural grass surfaces and what's involved in getting a good one in place, but in budget allocation, I don't know. I know there's like the perimeter work is great, and like we're behind, of course, like the accessibility work as well. I definitely think that should be a priority here by all means. But my question, I guess that's my advocacy piece, but my question is, in terms of how the budget gets allocated, or does the city specifically say like this is athletic playing surface budget and this is, hardscaping budget? How does that process work? And then the bidding process, if you can share a little bit maybe about that and that with that in mind as well.
Sure, I can jump in on that. The way that we are breaking down the cost estimate is into different chunks. So there's the playground renovation chunk, there's the field renovation chunk, and then there's like perimeter chunk. And so I just want to be clear that the field renovation chunk is the most important piece, and then everything else sort of like falls into place after that. So with the playground renovation being an ad alternate that may or may not be incorporated in, and that's like a huge chunk of money. So if we, if it comes down to it, when we end up really heavily assessing what work needs to be done in the fields and with, you know, lighting and all of the work, all of the site work that goes into all of that, that will not happen. And if it means that we need to reduce site furnishings around the perimeter, we will reduce site furnishings around the perimeter to prioritize the budget for the fields. So I just want to be clear about that. So we'll be doing that work before it goes out to bid. And then once it goes out to bid, we would have like what's called like an add-alt package. So like if it comes in that all of the site work can be done within the budget that we have, we would still include an add alternate in that package so that in case the bids come in from the contractor and they're over what we have cost estimated, we can scrap that, but still keep the funding for the field renovations and the perimeter wherever we land. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess, you know, we're just speaking on behalf of the folks at JP Youth Soccer. I know there are a few on the call, so thank you all for showing up. Yeah, and we're just like happy to be engaged in the process as that happens, and just, you know, we want to be supportive of it. We of course want to be reasonable. I know there's a lot of different competing priorities, of course, but yeah, it's encouraging certainly to hear that the primary goal here is around the playing surface. So, you know, as long as we can remain kind of involved and consulted in that along the way, we'd really welcome that.
I will say that from an overall cost perspective, you know, unless it's drastically worse out there than I think it is, and frankly, if it were, we'd have seen it in just a really in the level we've been able to look at it. The budget is plenty big enough to really refresh that field, upgrade the infield, address the fencing, get in new sports lighting, and the critical pieces of the accessibility and around the perimeter. I mean, I can say pretty confidently all of that will happen. It starts to be, you know, do we get into how much do we manage to renovate the bleachers, depending on where the budget comes back? How much site furniture do we put in? As Nellie said, are we able to afford the playground? So I'd say that, well, one thing I didn't mention that I noticed sort of didn't get brought up is that wherever there are empty, where there are empty tree pits and so forth, where we can, we're going to try to put new trees back into those to prepare the tree canopy for future years too. Just something I realized I hadn't covered in my overview of the design. But yeah, the priority really is to tackle the most important stuff for certain, and then as much as we can of the rest of things. And we have pretty good confidence we will get through most of it. The playground right now is the part that feels sort of on the fence, and it depends where costs come back. But as we get into the details, we'll get a better sense of exactly where the break point ends up.
Great. Thank you all.
Okay, next is Dan. I'm unmuting you now.
Dan Rastusha, also a JP Youth Soccer coach. And so first want to thank you for putting this project forward. It's a much needed project. I think overall the plan looks really exciting and like will make Murphy feel like the kind of really high quality facility that our kids in the neighborhood deserve. So want to note, like overall, there's a real shortage of available playing fields in JP. You know, the competition for field space for scheduling practices across soccer, baseball, et cetera, is quite tight. And so getting this field up to snuff will be a big help there. I do want to note that, like, and I appreciate all of what you're saying about getting this field to a level where it really is, well, not Fenway Park, a top quality city park playing field. That does feel a little bit at odds with your assessment of the field. I think for those of us who are there running practices, the ratio of weeds to dirt to grass is pretty heavily skewed in favor of the weeds and the dirt. I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find more than a handful of blades of actual grass in there. So I'm a little bit worried about a plan that isn't a rip and replace, but ultimately I'm not a landscaper, and so we'll defer to the experts on that. So that was my comment, and want to turn over to my daughter Zoe for a moment.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm in 7th grade and I've played for JPYS for a while. I just wanted to say that we need some better fields in our neighborhood. Last fall, my teams had to practice until 9 p.m. due to a lack of fields, and I just wanted to make sure that this project includes field upgrades so we have a better field to play on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan and Zoe. Yeah, absolutely. I also live right around the corner from this site and am a soccer player. So I can relate to all of these comments. I just want to say that the condition of the field, the idea of like rip and replace, of like replacing the whole field with sod, is not the most, what we think is the most resilient and durable solution for these fields. So it's less about budgetary constraints and the idea that we would completely remove all of the grass and replace it. And it's more about what we think would do well here, given that irrigation isn't possible here. And also that the condition of the field is in pretty good shape. And we also want to get people back out on the field as soon as possible. And what's good about overseeding, instead of like completely ripping out all the grass and putting down sod, is that we have more control over species. So we can interweave different types of species to help compete out some of the weeds that you're seeing. Whereas if we did sod, it first of all wouldn't make sense at all, but it would require irrigation, it would require fertilizer and different types of maintenance that we don't have the capacity here for, but also wouldn't be as healthy and as durable as the overseed solution. So we can talk more about that, but this is the most resilient and durable solution for this site, for sure. And it's not about like trying to save money. It's about doing what we think will work the best here for the use and get people back on the site and can handle the amount of use that this site will be receiving.
And to piggyback slightly on what Nellie was saying when they talked about the fields being in good shape, that's structurally the soil seems to be in good shape. Clearly, the grass cover is not. But the soil structure seems to be there. It seems to percolate well. It's not a compacted mess where even the weeds won't grow and that sort of thing. So we have good bones to work with here, with some targeted strategies. Not so as not to say it's not about targeting just little teeny areas. We really do want to address the whole field.
Yep.
But it's being choosy in how we do it so as to, as they said, provide the most resilient possible field.
And I also wanted to, I didn't speak to this earlier, but about the request for more maintenance. We have, so the package includes 10 mowings. So when the contractor goes and installs this site or installs the grass, we own 10 mowings. But the contractor has to successfully, we have to have mowed the site 10 times for us to come back into ownership. So there's no question of whether or not the site will establish before it gets turned back over to parks. Like it's part of the contract documents that the seed and the turf, the natural turf, will be well established and healthy before it gets turned back over to parks. At that point, we are working on improving our maintenance regime with all our ball fields. We're in the process of buying some new equipment to basically like cut the edge of the infield to help with delineating the infield from the perimeter natural turf. We have a couple of like on-call contracts to work with contractors to come in and do field repairs. So I think after this park gets its investment, it'll be definitely one of our sites that we're prioritizing in terms of maintenance and making sure that we are upholding our end of the investment into this space alongside you guys. So that was all I wanted. Oh, and then there was a comment about dogs, and honestly, my answer is that I don't know exactly what to do about that right now, but I am going to escalate that concern and try to figure out the best way to handle that situation, because it is a public park. people are able to walk their dogs on the site off on leash. And I know that it's an issue because I've been there running around and noticed it myself. So it's on my radar, and it will certainly be a design consideration or policy consideration.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Yep. Next in line is Bridget. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bridget Colvin. I'm also with JPU Soccer. And I wanted to say, like everyone else did, thank you so much for this renovation. I'm not exaggerating when I say I think our coaches think they're being punished when they're sent to Murphy for their practices. It's really dark right now, and it's really uneven, and we've had coaches fill in holes in Murphy, on their own time so that it's safer for people to play. So we really appreciate hearing about all these plans. I'm looking at the schematic design right now, and are there going to be lines on the field for these soccer fields, and are there going to be goals and provided from the city? Because that's another thing our coaches are really sad about, is they have to take the goals then to and from Murphy because we don't have goals over there. And then is there any flexibility about the U6 soccer field? That's really cute, but I don't think actually any 6-year-old soccer groups are permitted to play there. So could we expand that at all if you're making lines to, I don't know, U9, U10, something a little bit bigger? It looks like there's a little bit of room.
So there's, in terms of the field size question, I think that the plan is not to stripe lines on the field, but I'll defer to Nelly on that question. So it's certainly something that we could do in the first season, but it sort of becomes an ongoing maintenance question of whether they can get restriped every year. But to quickly address the one I do know the answer to, it might be possible, Preston, I don't remember if you looked into whether anything bigger than a U6 fit. I think that the issue was if they were getting used at comparable times, we needed certain amounts of run out room around the fields for safety. And that's why that's sort of like, if you were trying to program both soccer uses at once, that could be up closer to a, that it doesn't get much larger, but we can look at it again and double check. But I mean, if there's a U10 group, you just put them on the U12 field and go a little smaller. If they're not trying to happen at the same time.
Yeah, there may have been some overlap of the field. That's something we could definitely look
Yeah.
at again when we were at a larger size from U6.
Oh, that's right. When we were at one point, we had the actual full 90-foot diamonds infield on there, so that pushed a little closer, and that may be why we scaled down to a U6. We'll look at it again, but I think Nelly, the question stands in terms of striping. My guess is that's. I don't know what the answer to that is. So
Yeah. My understanding, so I'm new to parks. I started in August, so I actually don't know the answer to that question of whether my answer would be no without having talked with my supervisor as far as laying out striping, just because there's so many different uses that are going on in the same area. And same with the goals, like if there were goals there, they would I muted myself. If there were permanent like soccer goals, they would cause problems with the little league and softball field. And there's not like a storage area on site where those could be stored. But it's not a budgetary concern. It's more of like a logistics concern and sort of like trying to appease everyone. But I can certainly look into that more. I know that it's a possibility that we can stripe, but that we would want to just confirm with all the other users that it was appropriate because of the overlaid field dimensions.
Yeah. And in terms of goals, I think if there were goals, they would need to be portable goals just because of that overlay of field uses. And then the question becomes one of storage. And I think as everyone who knows the field knows, there isn't really spare space anywhere to stick a storage locker, unfortunately.
Okay, next person is Brad. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all your work and the presentation to date. My name is Brad Mahoney. I'm with both the Regan League and JPYS. I coach with both and have spent a better part of my last 5 years over at Murphy, coaching both soccer and baseball. And Nellie, thank you in particular. You've been particularly engaging early and often to kind of get us to this point. So I appreciate that. I know it's a lot of work and you had a lot of ramp up time starting in August. So couple quick comments. Let me just follow up on the goal question that we were just talking about. So one option that we've seen in other fields is, because this is a U12, it would be a portable goal, and you could potentially chain it deep in center field and be potentially out of the way of ultimate. I mean, I think, you know, that might be something that when we have kind of the all user group meeting on site, which I believe Kieran had recommended, maybe that's something we could look at and kind of plan out where that would go. That's probably a good point to kind of tackle that.
Yeah.
You know, and this process, like Alf was talking about, started a couple of years ago. We met Commissioner Woods, Alf, Karen, and myself, just kind of walking through what could be done and make this a high quality playing field. So, so that the user group meeting, I think, is really important. Regan, JPYS, Ultimate, etc. One comment on the baseball field. So the infield, as it currently stands, drains really well. It's actually drains much better than most other fields that we use kind of across the city. So maintaining an all dirt infield, while not typically seen in the pros, is probably preferable from a youth sports perspective. That's one thing. And then, Nellie, you and I have had conversations about this. Would you mind maybe sharing with everyone else that's on the call, just because this site is owned by BPS, what restrictions come with that, you know, lack of a water line? Because some folks, you know, at Regan have asked, oh, could we have a portable filling station? I understand that might be a challenge. You know, like, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that? And I don't need to re-echo all the comments about the playing surface and the grass and everything. I'll let that's kind of sort of in its own. So thank you, Nellie.
Yeah, so this is one of like a very few number of sites in the city of Boston that is owned by Boston Public Schools, but it is operated by Boston Parks. And so what that means is that we don't have like full control of some of the infrastructure. So for example, with the water, there with the water lines are, you know, with Boston Water and Sewer Commission. Boston Water and Sewer Commission doesn't like it or usually allow a separate water line to come into a parcel where it's already coming in a different location. So that what I'm trying to say is you can't have two separate service lines within one parcel. And we also, because it's BPS owned, we as Boston Parks maintenance team, we cannot take care, we are not entitled to take care of any kind of like plumbing work. So any type of like irrigation would have to be owned and operated by Boston Public Schools. And we don't, they will not take care of exterior plumbing. So that that affects both the, I did push really hard to try to get you know, a water bottle station here, but it is logistically very complicated. And same with, irrigation. It doesn't, and it also is not necessary for the site, the irrigation. So that's the logistical stuff behind the actual field ownership. Yes, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And just
Okay.
out of curiosity, where does the water line come into the site relative to Mimi's?
To the building. I don't know exactly where in the building it comes in.
Okay, just curious if it was kind of close to the backstop or maybe, further up. I'm not, yeah, okay.
It would require a separate, either way, wherever it runs in, it would require like a separate water cabinet and separate plumbing system. And that's the issue, no matter where the line comes in.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you, Brad, so much for all of your work and filling in all those holes in the field and trying to keep people from getting injuries. We appreciate your commitment to this space. Thank you for all of that and all the conversations that we've had.
Okay, next is Elle Cremens. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, and thanks for this presentation. I live on Carolina Avenue, directly across from the field, basically at the entrance to the field, the existing entrance right now. And my concern is for the trees along Carolina Avenue. They are predominantly ash trees, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but ash trees are critically vulnerable right now to the Elmwood ash borer. And this summer, the city of Boston came and inoculated those trees to try and prevent any damage to the trees. I spoke to the chief arborist, Max Ford Diamond, about it. And so my concern is I love the idea that you want to have a lovely permeable paving all around the park. It sounds great, but I'm concerned about damage to those trees by the construction company lifting up the existing concrete and installing the new permeable surface. I'm hoping that you will have an arborist on present and do everything you can to protect those trees. That's the first part of my question. And then the second part of my question is you mentioned 3 yellowwood trees that will possibly come down. In your illustration, you didn't indicate where those trees are, so I'm not quite sure which are yellowwoods and which are the ash trees. I would hope that we could preserve every tree possible because we really need that shade.
Right. So to address the question about the trees first, since Preston rolled us back to the right slide, the red X's are the indications of where the trees are according to the arborist report that we've gotten so far. So the little one to the left on Carolina is actually, it's a small white mulberry that's actually integrated with the fence and just a mess, and it's basically a weed. And it's only about 2 inches caliper.
Okay.
Barely warrants recognition. The 3 yellowwoods, there's one on Carolina, one on Verona, and one on Child.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all ones with fairly major trunk damage that the arborist's quick assessment was concerns about the long-term survival, whether or not this project went ahead. So those are the ones that are under consideration, and we're sort of weighing removing them versus removing them now when we're otherwise doing construction versus trying to preserve them, but knowing that they are already in significant decline and may have to come out down the road.
I would advocate for the second choice.
Appreciated, and we will be looking at that with Max and with our arborist that's on the staff. And yeah, the goal really is to preserve as much tree canopy as we can. To that end, I know that Nellie and Max Diamond talked about getting inoculation for the ash trees that are on the other sides of the site as well, and really all throughout the site, trying to protect against emerald ash borer. And our consulting arborist, who we went with to get an outside opinion from Boston Parks, also noted that there's, a little bit of evidence of yellowing in the ash trees, and that they might have ash borer, and definitely to inoculate. So that's all on the very much on the radar, and and so forth. To your question and your comment about protecting the trees during construction, absolutely, very much a priority. That we're going to have careful, tight specs on the asphalt removal. We're going to be, watching over them and making sure it's all going correctly. We have an arborist on the team that we can call in during construction. Again, I think to look at the process as it's happening, and yeah, and the contractor doesn't want to pay for a declining tree that has to get removed either, but yeah. Someone asked in the chat, because it's relevant to this, Chris Roddy asked in the chat, or Roddy, will you need to raise the grade along the perimeter walkway in order to be above the existing roots? In places, we definitely will need to. And that's one of the benefits of the permeable, flexible paving, is that we'll be able to, with that mow strip under the fence line, to help keep weeds from growing there anyway, that gives us some ability to play with the height of the pavement so that we can go up above, so that, to your point, Ms. Cremens, we don't have to excavate down into where the roots are to install the permeable paving correctly. We basically have to, as carefully as possible, lift the asphalt off of the top with as minimal disruption to the roots below as possible, and then lay down just enough gravel to even things off and put the flexible pavement on top so that we get a nice smooth surface without disruption to the existing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'll report that to the others in my building, and they'll be very happy to hear that, and my other neighbors on the street who've been very concerned. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your concern, because the tree health is definitely pretty darn important. Those are significant trees.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just hop in on that too. One of the reasons that we're suggesting the flexi pave, or the pervious paving, is because it was a suggestion of Max Ford Diamond, the city arborist, to help improve the quality of the conditions that the trees are in, so that they're less stressed. So while of course there is stress that is imposed on them during the construction process, I've been talking with Max and other project managers about how to really control the specifications, to control the construction process, to reduce that burden and stress on the trees, and then replace it with a condition that will allow them to thrive, will hopefully increase their lifespan. And yeah, so I just want to throw that out there, that it's not just about accessibility, it's also about improving the conditions for the trees to succeed in the neighborhood. And the tree ordinance in the city of Boston is really one of the design drivers that's about to get deployed, which is really prioritizing the trees above all else. So don't worry, we are tree aware, and we are very happy to protect and preserve them. And thank you for your concern.
Thank you. Music to my ears. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, new user again.
Hello, sorry about that. My name is Joel Thompson. I'm the head coach for Boston's youth program, the Boston Ultimate Disc Alliance. So I coach Ultimate Frisbee, and we're the new kids on the block, but we started at Murphy in 2021 with 8 kids, and now we're approaching 80 citywide in various fields. And people have grown really attached to Murphy. I want to thank the folks from soccer, from baseball, from the Munis, and especially Parks and Rec for communicating with us and sort of allowing us to come in and offer some input and collaborate with you on this. We are in Ultimate Frisbee, we are very used to, coming in when it works, knowing that there's a lot of other use for these spaces that's, long existed before we came around. That's something we're really sensitive to. And so I appreciate the work we've been able to do with the other groups who use the field to make sure we're not stepping on toes. Nice thing about us is we don't have any equipment. We come, we leave, and hopefully don't leave a trace if we can help it. And I appreciate Parks and Rec asking us, what we are interested in with Murphy. And I don't want to belabor any points that have already been made. But but in case you needed more evidence of that, a lot of our families are very interested in that tree canopy because they ring those sidelines, to watch their kids play. And especially as the weather gets warmer, and unfortunately, we're probably looking at warmer weather going forward. We're going to need that shade. And then other than that, the high priority, like you said, has been field quality. And for us, sort of maximizing that limited space. I appreciate the schematic design and what a U15 field looks like on there. We use, with different age groups, we use Murphy different ways, but we basically end up trying to use every square inch that's safe to use. And so I appreciate both that we are not only trying to renovate and upgrade the field, which is the most important thing. A lot of twisted ankles out there that could be avoided with an upgrade, but also trying to preserve that space so that it has the most flexibility for us. And because of it's just enough for us that we can use it in our program and pretty much stay off the infield, help out baseball and softball players that way, hopefully. And of course the accessibility, I understand the accessibility stuff too. I think that makes total sense. I have a dream someday of having enough people to actually want to sit in those bleachers and watch a Frisbee game. We'll see if that ever happens, but thank you. And again, and one thing I just wanted to flag, and if you're going to do a site visit, you'll see it, but there's storm drains, I think 3,
Yes.
like one on each side of that field,
Yep.
which right now that's our boundary, right? We don't want to be running on those. So everything sort of happens inside of there. I don't know if those are going to stay in a new configuration, or if that's going to go away, or how that's going to work. That's my only real question.
Yeah. Preston, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we were finalizing field layout, I believe we sort of have them so that the drains are where we could outside the field boundaries. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. I think I'll have to double check, but one of the closest drains to a boundary is right in this area. But as far as eliminating them, we would hate to create any drainage issues by doing so. And where the drain lines are, it makes it hard to relocate a structure. Beyond that, it's also a pretty big cost endeavor. But maybe we can raise the rim elevations to improve, any dips or something. When we go out there, we can look at that. A little more detail.
Another thing that we can look at a little bit more on the design end is I know that there are have been conversations about like lowering the drain actually. So, and having basically so that it's not superficially expressed, and there's a grass over it, but it's still receiving water drainage, so that the finished grade of the soil is at the top of the rim, basically. But anyway, we'll study that a little bit more. It's something that's been on my mind, and I have some construction details that I can share with the designers to talk through how we can deal with the drains. Yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, so our goal so far, as Preston said, has been to design with the drains in mind and make sure we can still fit in the fields with the drains outside their boundaries. But even then, kids run out of bounds, and you have drills that go out of bounds. So if the strategies Nelly's talking about work, that's an even better approach, and we will definitely pursue that. Yeah.
Yeah, we will certainly look into it more, and yeah, thanks.
That'd be awesome if it works. And it's not, I agree. Drainage is I don't want to do anything to mess with the drainage, because it did, last year, especially where we saw some real hard, torrential rainpours, like that field held pretty well compared to a lot of the other places where we played.
That's why when we talk about the field having good bones and good structure, the things we usually run into on fields that are big problems of drainage and ponding, and deep left field is always a swamp. Every time it rains, it takes 2 weeks to dry out. We don't seem to be running into those here. So fortunately, it's problems that are
solvable.
They're surface problems. They're easily solvable, yeah, in many ways. Yep. All right. I don't see any further hands raised. Does that mean we want to roll into going through the chat? Probably, right?
Sure. Let's just run through and see if there's anything we haven't chatted about already on here. So for lights, the lighting can be, the timing of the lights being on and off can be adjusted per the permit holders, but right now the lights typically come on around dusk and go off around 10:30, unless specified otherwise by the permit holders. So that's the answer to that one. The netting is, we've talked about being replaced on all three sides, and I did want to bring up the fact that we do have, conflict with the tree canopy interfering with the netting. So it will require some pruning of the trees, and a couple places we'll have to make some, tough calls about whether we want to preserve the tree's structural integrity or netting. And so we have to look more closely at exactly where those problem areas are. But we know that balls going over the fence is a priority, and we know that trees are a priority. So we just have to find the balance between those two conflicting desires. Let's see, I'm just running through all of these. Gates and fences, for keeping, we can certainly add no dogs off leash signs. I can certainly look into that, and as I mentioned before, I will try to follow up about behavioral sort of like control that we can try to deploy at this site. Let's see, I'm just running through budget. The lockers, we don't have any on-site storage, and that is not really a feasible option at this site. There's not really a location that could work for that. If I have missed, I feel like we've talked about the rest of these questions. If anybody feels like they didn't get an answer, please feel free to repeat or jump in.
I do see a question. Will the benches with backs all have single arms in the middle? Is that currently the Boston Park standard, is to have a single arm in the middle, or does it vary by project?
I think it varies by project. Yeah.
I mean, certainly a single arm helps with people that have mobility limitations, giving extra support to stand up and so forth, which is good. I think we're open to discussion on the bench arms, and we'll go over that with Nellie and finalize the detail. I see a hand up from Dan, who also, there was a question in the chat from Dan that maybe this is why you have your hand up.
Oh, the murals.
Yes, about the murals. So we are planning to protect and preserve all of the murals that are there. We're not planning on repainting any of them. So where they've been worn, we're not likely to address it. But the current plan is not to touch any of them. We actually have a structural engineer who is looking at the walls with us to confirm our current impression that the walls actually, despite the little bit of a lean on Verona Street, that lean seems to have been there for 40 years and not really moved. So despite trees having gotten significantly bigger above it. So we're getting it assessed just to be 100% sure, but our impression is that we won't need to actually do anything to the retaining walls, and therefore the murals should stay in place, and we'll call on the contractor to protect them. Did you have further questions with the hand up?
That's great. I really appreciate that. I think we really want to support public art where we can. So I really like that we have so much just in this neighborhood. So that's great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Same. I love the sign language letters. It's great. It's like, yeah, it makes me very happy when I see it. Ben, Mr. Counselor Wilbur?
Hi, thanks. And again, I thank you, Nellie and DJ, and sorry, the other person presenting. I think you guys have really put together an impressive presentation, and then you dealt with questions very well. I had one thing, and maybe you've thought about this, maybe not, and I wouldn't want this to delay this project, but there is a need for dog parks in JP. My kids used that playground when they went to kindergarten at the, and in the lower grades at the Mission Hill School. I don't know what grades go to the Muniz right now. If they've gone back to, first grade, kindergarten, then there's obviously a need for the playground. If there isn't, because it's a high school, I would think a dog park, would be easier to create than a playground, and it would take the dogs off of the field. I'm sure there's all kinds of issues about the abutters on Carolina. I'm looking at this and I see a solution, to the dog. There are not a lot of dog parks in JP, and I know there's a big playground where I often see families at the end of Carolina, near the tracks. Whereas, I don't see a lot of families gathering at this playground. I don't know if it's still in use by the school. So throwing that out there for discussion, not something that, something that might help the field, might fill a gap for people who need a fenced-in space for their dogs. Anyway, so that's all I got. And hopefully, I don't know. Yeah, I thought this meeting was going to go to 7. Maybe it was supposed to go to 8, but I just would like to recognize your generosity with your time and willingness to answer everyone's questions.
Thank you, Counselor. We really appreciate your time as well. First, I will just say that yes, having more dog parks in JP would be amazing, and that's a great idea. However, at this location, there's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't work. Number one, because it's BPS property, but 2, because of the dense residential context that it's in. It's also it doesn't meet the minimum square footage requirements that we would need. And then also additionally, it's the playground is currently being heavily used by the community. And so for all of those different reasons, I don't think it's something that we would consider at this point, but I am certainly registering the need for a dog park in this area, and will certainly convey that to the parks community.
Thank you. I'd like to put a bookend on this for you, having asked the first question, hopefully the last. I would recommend, we have an on-site visit so people could go over the issues on the field. It sounds like this is a great start to this process, and that, I think you've heard these are, the stakeholders in this, between Joel Thompson and Alf and Bridget and Dan and Brad Mahoney, neighbors on Carolina. I think you've heard from a lot of people who care a lot about this site, and it seems like you've really put together something that I think a lot of people can get behind. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And again, anyone is more than welcome to follow up with me directly after this meeting, and I will be in touch about next steps and next opportunities to get together or to facilitate feedback. So thank you all so much. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the website in about a week. So feel free to hop off and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you all for your time.